anticipates the day when God, through his church, provides more than enough for kids and families in foster care. Jason serves as the National Director of Foster Care Initiatives for the Christian Alliance for Orphans and lives in Plano, Texas. Is it Plano or Plano, Jason?
It's Plano, Texas.
All right. Well, welcome. Thanks so much for being on.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. So, Jason, start us off. I kind of alluded to it in your bio, but what started you on this journey for working with kids from hard places?
Yeah, my wife and I, we dated through college, and we knew that we wanted to wait until we graduated to get married. So we waited 6 days. 6 days after we graduated from college, we got married. And we went on staff with an inner city ministry, as you mentioned. We moved into a downtown neighborhood and worked with kids and families in our neighborhood through the local church. One of the things that we discovered pretty quickly, now we'd always had a heart for adoption. We always thought, hey, maybe someday that's something we'll do. But when we were working in the city, at least in the neighborhood we worked in with the kids that we worked with, over half of them had been touched by foster care at some point in their lives. And so we decided, really as a practical matter, to go ahead and become foster parents. So we were about 25, 26 years old at the time, and never had kids, and we signed up to be foster parents. So, as everybody on this call understands, there's, a fair amount of paperwork. But one of the pieces of paperwork, is this form that talks about, all of the different conditions or experiences that a kid might have had, and asks you whether you would be willing to bring a child home who has that experience, or would not be willing, or might be willing, might consider it, right? So would you be willing to bring a child into your home who has a hearing impairment? Yes, no, or might consider. Would you be willing to have a child come in your home who's experienced sexual abuse? Yes, no, or might consider. I don't know all the things we filled out. I don't remember, but I know a couple of things we were pretty sure we were not ready for. And one of those was sibling groups. We, like I said, we were 25, 26 years old, had no idea what we were doing. One kid at a time seemed like a really good idea. Two, we didn't think, we were certainly not ready for major medical needs. I mean, how crazy would you have to be to put a child with major medical needs in the hands of a 25-year-old who'd never had kids before? So we got a phone call from our social worker, and she said, hey, we've got these preemie twins. For those of you that aren't great at math, that's 2 kids. We've got these preemie twins. They've been in the hospital for 3 months. They were 10 weeks premature. They both have heart defects. One of them actually had heart surgery at 11 days old and almost died. They were born at under 2 pounds. They might be on oxygen for 18 months, and they might have cerebral palsy, but we won't know that until they're 2 years old. What do you think? Well, I think you probably didn't read my paperwork to start with.
They're thinking you're young and hearty and full of energy.
Yeah, they're thinking I'm naive for fresh blood.
Right, that too.
They were right. And so my wife, being who she is, she said, well, they told us, because of their needs and because it's a lot to take on, we could actually go down and meet them and just see what it's all about at the hospital, at neonatal intensive care. And so let's just go meet them. Well, you guys, how that turns out. So we go to the hospital, and we go, and I come from a small farming town in the middle of Kansas. That's where I grew up, about 1,200 folks. I'd never spent a night in a hospital, much less been, in a neonatal intensive care unit of a major metropolitan hospital. And so to see these incubators and these babies, baby after baby, I was completely overwhelmed. We went to the end of the unit. The nurse walked us to the end of the unit, and she opened up these sliding glass doors to this one final room, and there was this big steel crib in there. And I looked over the edge, and there were these 2 tiny babies. Now, they were tiny to me. They were 5 pounds. They were enormous. They were giants for the neonatal intensive care unit, because they'd been in there 3 months. They were 5 pounds. 5 pounds is huge in there. And so, but I remember seeing the cords and the tubes, and they looked so sick. And I just, remember thinking, we can't handle this. Like, this is not something we can handle. It's not something we can do. But as we talked about it and as we prayed about it, something that the Lord impressed upon our hearts and he's done this a couple of different times, was this very real sense of, it doesn't really matter what you feel like you can handle. If I've called you to do something, I will equip you to do it. I'll give you what you need to do it. And so we said yes. And we brought these two babies home to a house. Like they had to finish up our foster care paperwork because it wasn't even completely final. And so we were in the middle of a house remodel. Our kitchen didn't have a floor in it. It had plywood floors. So we had, and we'll get into this a little more later, but a friend of ours from church, he and a buddy of his who I don't even know, came over and did our floors while we're at the hospital picking them up. Now, the funny thing is they said to us, well, we said, when do we bring them home? And they said, well, how about tomorrow? And we said, no, not tomorrow. You have to teach us how to keep these people alive. We're not taking them tomorrow. And so they said, okay, 3 days. And so we spent the next 3 days, like learning the ropes, figuring things out, trying to get floors done and all of that. So brought them home to chaos. And that's how we got in. And that case lasted 3.5 years. And in fact, if you'll allow me, I can, I can share a screen. I can share a picture really quick.
Oh, we'd love it.
So what I'm about to share is.
Oh.
Well, it's not going full screen. Oh, here we go. So that's the day they came home. That's the stroller that I put together in the parking lot of a Domino's Pizza on the way to the hospital. And
that's awesome.
And that's them. And then this is them a few months later. If it wants to switch, it's having a hard time switching.
Yeah, how big are they in that picture, the double strollers?
They're about 5 pounds in there. That's the day they came home. So, but the case lasted about 3.5 years. It ended up going to termination and then adoption. We fostered for a total of about 10 years. And we saw some kids come and go. Most of the kids that came to us ended up staying. And so we have 5 that we've adopted out of foster care.
Wow.
That's how we ended up in this space.
Okay, you're still screen sharing.
Yeah, I'm trying to stop it, but it won't allow me to get out. It's kind of frozen on me. I'm sorry.
Oh, there you are. I was going to say, okay, we'll just have this conversation with the picture up. Wow, so you have five kiddos now from foster care.
We do, yep.
And
they range in age now. The girls, those twins are now 19 years old, and they're in college.
Wow.
So we range in age. We go 19, 19, 15, 11, and 10.
Awesome. Okay. So they must, obviously those 2 twins didn't put you over the edge enough to stop. I mean, you continued, you ended up fostering and having 3 more. And were there any kids that did you end up fostering and not adopting?
We did, yeah. We had some kids that went to biological family or to another family, but not many. Most of the ones that we ended up getting ended up staying with us.
And so, tell us about, just so people could kind of understand a little bit more about who you are and what you do. Tell us a little bit more about what it is that you do now.
Yeah.
And maybe that transition to that role. I don't know if that's too long of a conversation, but yeah.
No, so yeah, so about, like I said, that first case was 3.5 years, and somewhere in the midst of that, we became, I started asking the question. We were, like I said, we were doing inner city ministry at the time, and I began asking the question. We began looking around. We began asking, where is the church in all of this? Like we would have expected maybe to see the church more present in the foster care system than we did at the time. And this is, 20 years ago, but, and so we began asking the question, what would it look like for us? Like, what can we do? What can we do to help engage the church more in this space? And so we ended up transitioning to a role that where we were just trying to help churches understand the role that they had in caring for kids, and really building ministries in churches around this issue. And then eventually I ended up ended up in the role I'm in now with the Christian Alliance for Orphans. And my role is to get, ultimately we want to see 10% of churches in every county in the country, and there's 3,142 counties. We want to see 10% of churches in every county working together with each other and with other community organizations and with local government to provide more than enough for kids and families in foster care. So my goal is to really get people collaborating and working together on local foster care transformation.
I love it. That's so exciting. And I love that God has put that on your heart. I think that's transformational. I think we cannot be asking people to take in kiddos without having any kind of collaboration, like you said, without coming alongside them in some way with ministries and tools and encouragement, because this is a rough road. I mean, sometimes I come across people who aren't having challenges, whether it's adopting through foster care, or just even international adopting. And I'm always amazed. I'm like, wow, you're okay, high five, but that hasn't been my experience. And that hasn't been the experience that I've heard from a lot of the people in our support groups, which is hence why we have support groups. So I just love that, that's the space that you're in. It's just, the church is near and dear to my heart. And so I love that. So let me ask you, what has been your experience in receiving support from within the church or the community? I mean, we want to infiltrate the community, for change as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because, our experience starting out with support was really strong. Like we had a strong support network, but we've experienced both. We've experienced periods of time where we haven't felt like we have a lot of support around us. And so definitely we've experienced both ends, but one of the things that, how I see support is it's not just about, for me, it's not just about getting help. It's not about getting relief. It's not about getting respite. It's not just about that, right? It's, at the end of the day, I feel like a big part of it is allowing other people to carry a piece of our kids' story, right? Because this is something we really can't do well by ourselves, and by allowing other people in, we're allowing them to carry a piece of our kids' story. So just the story I just told you, to just zoom in a little bit on what that actually looks like when it comes to support. So we show up at the hospital and we get to know one of the nurses that has been caring for these girls for 3 months. And it was Nurse Heather. And we found out as we got to know her that the girls were really, really difficult and really fussy and cried a lot. And so she would go in and she would rock them. And she had just become a follower of Jesus. She had just come to Christ. Nurse Heather. And so this was really her first adventure into praying, and she began praying for the girls while she rocked them, and she prayed that God would provide them a Christian family. And then we showed up, and she realized just how real God is.
Wow.
And she would actually, before we came along, she would go home to her husband, who was Fireman Brian, and they would pray together for them. And they would go to their small group that they had just gotten involved in, and they would ask their small group to pray for these girls, that they would have Christian home. And so Nurse Heather and Fireman Brian, they have a part of our girls' story. I mentioned the guy at our church, Dave, who came and did our floors so that we could come home and have floors. And his friend, who we don't even know. There was a coworker of ours named Lynn, and we to this day still call her Auntie Lynn. She's the one that ran to Babies R Us while we were trying to learn how to change oxygen tubes at the hospital. And she's the one that went and picked up the stroller at Babies R Us so that we could put it together in the parking lot of a Domino's. So Auntie Lynn has a part of our story. There was John and Diane and June and Steve, who were part of our church, they were physicians. And they were the only people, this is hilarious to me, but they were the only people qualified to babysit these girls because of all their medical needs. Because if they pulled their oxygen out, they'd start to turn blue within 10 seconds. So we had to have doctors and medical professionals like babysit them. But somehow the system was just fine with us who had zero medical experience, you know, parenting them. But that's another story. And so John and Diane and Steve and June, they had a part of their story. And then you mentioned the community. There was a lawyer, you know, as we were going through the case, we were, you know, a long ways in. It was clearly going to termination, but we needed legal help, and we were young and in inner city ministry and couldn't afford it. And found this woman who named Bonnie, who said, "Hey, I'll help you, and it won't cost anything." And she came and sat in court and translated for us and helped us, you know, through that. And so Bonnie has a piece of their story. So there's all these people, and that's just a few of them. You know, I've got 19-year-old girls who are twins, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens of people who have a little piece of their story that they carry with them. And I think that's really important, because I think it's important not just because of the help we got, but because of what the piece of that story means to everybody who carries it with them, and how it has helped lead them on the next step in their journey. You know, some of those people have gone on to foster and adopt, and I can't help but to think that it has, you know, something to do with the piece of the story that they carry with them. So when people give to us, they're not just giving, they're getting. And it's important that we don't rob them of the opportunity to do that.
I love that you bring that up, because I was going to ask you, like, why is it important that other people have parts of the story? And I love your response that, you know, you just don't know what that opportunity can lead other people into.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people are, I mean, those of you that, you know, all of you on this call, you know that when you said yes to foster care and adoption, you entered into a story way bigger than you probably ever dreamed of. And honestly, these are stories that are way bigger than most people ever get the opportunity to enter into. Like these are cosmic. I mean, all the great movies and all the great Bible stories, they all involve kids who come from hard places and who don't have parents, because those are cosmic stories that show the majesty and character of God. And most people don't get to experience those on a first, you know, a close-up basis. And so when we allow people to enter into that story with us, that we get the privilege of seeing every day, but for them, sometimes it's mind-blowing for them to get to enter into that. And so I think it's super important that we, whenever possible, we allow people into that story.
That gave me goosebumps. Just, I don't know, just even hearing you frame it that way, you know, about even how God, you know, his miraculous stories start with turmoil and hard places, and just the magnitude of that, and allowing other people into that story, and how we get to be instruments in that. You know, it is a struggle at times. And so what is it like when, what the difference between receiving help, and then you said there were times where you didn't receive help? What, you know, I know we have all probably experienced, you know, some of that as well as the not receiving help. And what difference did that make in your journey?
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, there's sort of the obvious things that would make a difference, right? Like, you know, you're not getting date nights as much, and you're not getting, you know, nobody's bringing meals over, nobody's babysitting, nobody, you know, there's all of those things that you're missing out on. But I would actually say that the biggest difference for me is that those things are actually pretty minor. That the real difference to me is loneliness, is that when you're not getting help from other people, when you're not involving other people in the details of the story and the messiness of it, and they're not involved with you, and they're not, you know, you're not having those conversations when they come to, you know, give, you know, to watch your kids so you can get a date night, and you're having those conversations. It's really been the difference between being lonely and not being lonely. And I've, you know, at times when we have, you know, we've gone through some of our hardest years largely feeling alone, feeling like we don't have the support we need around us. You know, as the kids get older, and some of the trauma that, you know, manifests itself, it can get harder. And those times, yes, we wish we could get a date night. Yes, wish we could get a weekend away, you know, But more than that, I just wish we didn't feel so alone sometimes. And so I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, I've never really thought about that, but it almost brings tears to my eyes just thinking about that, yeah, it's lonely. I mean, I don't know what I would do without my support groups, without people um, who understand and who I feel safe talking to. Some of the stuff that we go through is mind-boggling,
Mm.
and I know for myself sometimes it can get hard to welcome people into the mess because you're afraid of being judged, you're afraid of um, even for myself, like opening yourself up, and hence opening up your life in the mess, and then being rejected.
Mm.
So I think for me, there's fear in that too. So I appreciate what you're saying. Like, yeah, it can be a lonely space when you don't have that kind of a support system.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, like why it can feel vulnerable to accept help. I'm actually curious, is there a way to can we ask everybody that's on, like
Yeah,
what
let's
makes
do
it
it.
hard for you to accept support? Like, I'd love to know some of your answers to that. What makes it hard for you to accept support from others?
So there you go, you guys. You, I think, can unmute yourself or raise your hand if you're on video, and I can unmute you. Helen, our fearless
I'll always
leader.
start off, right?
You're awesome.
I think, as you said, Tristan, is just the fear of someone not doing it or not showing up or not following through or just saying no, because I'm ongoing all the time with foster care, so people tended to people always say, oh, I want to help you, I want to help you. And so I'll say, well, come hold the baby, and then it's bye-bye, and then they never hear from them,
Yeah, yeah,
I have babies all the time, Jason. So
yeah. Yeah. So let me ask you, can I ask a follow-up question? Does it, does it sometimes feel to you like for some people it's maybe a project or it's a missions experience to come help versus instead of hey, there's this relationship, I have this relationship with Helen and I'm extended family for the kids in her home and I'm a part of their story. Does it instead feel like people just say, well, I'm looking for something to do because I want to do something good and I'll come and rock a baby, but then, I'm on to the next, I'll do the suitcase.
I think that pretty much sums it up. I don't have any personal family, so it makes me heavily church family dependent.
Yes.
I have not experienced like what you're saying. I hope I don't cry about everybody having a little piece of the story. I think there was some truth in that when I adopted my daughter. I got her, she was 3 weeks old and she's now 15. But with ongoing foster care, yeah, I see very little. I mean, it's been years since anybody said, can I bring you a meal? I have a newborn baby. I have a newborn baby. Come on. I'm not getting any sleep. It's great. And I'm by myself. So, so I think I've just stepped back from asking too. It's probably on me as much as,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's lonely though. You're right about lonely.
Yeah.
And you're dealing with, parents. That's always the dilemma. I've had 38 sets of parents, all of whom have major issues, mental health issues, homeless. So, you're trying to support them too. It's not just taking care of a baby. It's the support position that you're put in to support now someone who's been on drugs for 20 years and they're homeless and they're looking to you to help them. My goodness, how much of me is there to go around,
Mm.
Helen, I appreciate you saying too that, even you have stepped back from asking. Like,
Yeah.
that is a real thing. I totally hear that and can see that, yeah, you get tired of asking, especially when your needs are ongoing
And it's so
and
obvious.
nonstop.
You know, I guess that's kind of like husbands and wives who think, well, you know, you should know, you know, you're supposed to
Yeah,
read
it's
my mind.
right. I mean, it's obvious to you. Yes.
And also in the eyes of others, you're a professional at this. You're completely competent. You do this all the time. You're used to, it surely doesn't break your heart that kids come in and out of your home because you're used to it, right?
Or I love it, Jason. People always say, well, don't you get attached? Oh, I can never do that because I would get attached. And I say, no, I'm cool hearted. We don't get attached. Oh, hello.
Yeah. Yeah.
We get attached in about a minute and a half. When you look in the NICU, boom, you're hooked, you know?
Yeah. 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 Well, and when I see places where it works, looking in other communities and other churches that we've had a chance to interact with, so often it's done in a way where families are there. It's not a volunteer opportunity. It's this foster family or this adoptive family, that's your family. Like they're your people now. The goal is that the kids grow up actually feeling like those are my aunts and uncles. Those are just the people that are around. They're not volunteering to drop by and, they're family. And so, I think that's one of the keys is how do we go about, one, as a church, how do we go about building family for other people when they don't have family around, right? And how do we as ourselves build that family around ourselves? And I think that's the question. I think it's hard to do, but if it's left in the realm of hey, there's people who want to help out because this is their volunteer opportunity, then I think it's never going to feel to them or to you like real connected, ongoing, sustainable help. A friend of mine, he's a colleague, I'll just throw this out there. This is sort of Jason Johnson, and some of you may be familiar with some of his writing, jasonjohnsonblog.com, really great, insightful stuff on foster parenting. But he said there's two kinds of people. There's people that love you, and there's people who get you. And you need both, and you can't expect everyone to be both. Like your family, for instance, they love you. They're there for you. But they don't get you. They don't understand why you do what you do. They don't get they don't get the kids coming in and out, and but then there's people like that are on this call. They get you. Now, the people that get you, sometimes they've got so much going on their own that they don't have the opportunity to support you in ways. So you need both. You need to have a community of people who love you, who have the capacity to help, and the people who get you, who don't have the capacity to help, but have the capacity to listen, right? Mm-hmm. And I think those are both important.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's like a clear distinction. I think everybody on this call would love to help each other, when we hear what's going on in others' lives, especially in our support group. But our own capacities are diminished, because we're on the same boat. So I love that you distinguish the difference that we do. We need people who get us, who are, trauma informed and understand what that's like. But we also need people who have the capacity to love us, to give to us, whether or not they fully get us. And I saw Denise had a question.
Well, it was just, can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Yes.
Okay. I was just wanting also, when he asked the question about.
Oh, you got muted. How'd that happen? Start again.
Okay. Pretty much just agreeing with what Helen says, and the reason as to why we don't ask for help. It's people that just say, oh, what can I help you with? And just knowing who really is, saying that sincerely, or who's just saying that because it's a polite thing to say, I guess, in those times. So yes, I think for me personally, that has been the struggle of knowing who genuinely wants to help and who's just saying that just to say that, just to that polite thing to say when they see you carrying this baby and they just kind of throw that out there. So, but I also love the distinguishing on the other hand too, what you're saying about having our people. Today, a mom was sharing in another support group and how she's struggling. And that was just me. I mean, like, yes, we're there. I want to help her, but I need help too, you know? So it's just so, so difficult but I'm so glad for these arenas and for my people that, that understand what we're going through and being there for one another, just to be a sounding board, praying for one another, just so that we know we're not alone. Because physically, it does feel like we're alone.
Yeah.
In the day to day.
Yeah, you know, you bring up a really good point, and you say that you don't always know when people offer, you don't always know whether they're really offering or whether they're being polite, right? It's the same people who say, we should get lunch sometime, right? And but you don't actually ever get the day planners out. So you never know whether they really mean it or whether that's just something to say as you walk away. And that's hard, right? That's really hard. Yeah. And that goes back to that whole having, I personally would rather, and I think this is where I see the support model working the best, is when it's not, a revolving door of people who come in and out and say, hey, we can help for a bit or whatever, but it's actually a set of 3 or 4 family units who, they're your people, they're all in. And so when they say, can we help? You just have to trust that they mean it, and they wouldn't be on that team if they didn't, but getting to that group is, having that group is hard.
Well, and I wonder, Jason, maybe, with your experiences or what you've even seen, maybe not personally, but, you're in this world. Mm-hmm. How many frogs do you have to kiss before you find your prince? Like that whole thing. Like how many volunteers do you need to go through before you find your group that's willing to do some life with you? Because I can't imagine that the first person that jumps in this ministry, they don't always know. And maybe it is too much for them. I mean, I don't even know. I mean, maybe it's more than what they asked for. They had their heart in the right place. Like, oh, I want to help, orphans and people in our community who are raising these kids, and their heart's in the right place, but then they don't realize what a messy ministry this is. It's one of the toughest ministries in the church. You don't walk away always feeling good about what you did. You walk away sometimes carrying a burden. So I could see how people wouldn't stick with it. So how am I supposed to navigate that? How am I supposed to know?
Yeah.
Like, how do you do that?
It's a great question. I think it's the same as when we became, when we all became foster parents, or, we had to be trained. Like we had training, whether we thought we needed it or not, whether we thought, well, we parented before, why do we need this training? But you realize pretty quickly when you start talking about trauma stuff and trauma-informed care that you need to be trained in order to know how to do it well. And I don't think that's any different for support families. I think that it really is important that they get exposure for a couple of reasons. They get exposure to some training. One, they need to know how to help. They need to know that when, simple things like when you ask a foster family for help and they say, no, we're good, ignore it. It doesn't mean anything. Like you push past the no, we're good. And, simple things like that. But even when you get into trauma stuff and when you get it, some of there's a ministry in Colorado that when they do training for potential adoptive families and foster families, they have a night set aside, and you are required to show up with at least 4 people in your support community at that evening so they can be, oriented and trained around what does it look like to support a family who's doing, going through these things. What are some of the things they're going through? Because sometimes we have a hard time as foster parents articulating some things, and those are close relationships, right? Like you're bringing your sister and you're bringing your neighbor and you're bringing, and it's hard for you to say some hard things, but you get the person up front who, can say hard things for you. And so those are super important. There's another church who they have a banquet and sort of a situation where they invite somebody who comes in and speaks on trauma-informed care, but every one of their foster families gets a table like you would at a fundraising banquet,
Wow.
except there's no fundraising. And you get, you get 6 seats at the table in addition to yourselves, and you can invite anybody you want. So it can be your child's teacher, it can be their therapist, it can be, a relative, it can be a neighbor, a friend, and you fill up your table. And so that night there, all of the people that you already have are being, they're being helped and taught how to better care for you. So I think the training is the one side of it. I think the other side of it is just what you were saying, Tristan, about, how do we help people? Like sometimes they don't know what they're getting into and they get into it. And it's, there's this really interesting study that was done. They took a call center, right? So this job, and it was called the Realistic Job Preview. And I read about this in a book by Dan and Chip Heath. But this company, they hired, thousands and thousands of phone representatives to do sort of phone marketing, customer service kind of stuff. And so, huge turnover, right? People leave that job all the time because it's terrible. Like it's a terrible, environment. And so what they decided to do is they decided to have a realistic job preview. So you come in for the job interview and they tell you how bad it's going to be. They play a recording of one of their worst callers, like the most irate person you could possibly imagine. And they say, this is what it's like. And furthermore, we see that you live here. You know how bad that commute is? Like they tell you, like, it's going to take you an hour and a half to get, and so they tell you all the worst things. And so then they tracked all those people that went through the realistic job preview. And what you would think is all those people would have said no to the job. No, they didn't say no. What they found is that the retention rate went way up. People took the job, but they stayed with it. And I think there's a lot to learn there for foster parents. That one, we got to be honest with people at the front end of foster care. This is harder than you can ever imagine. Let me tell you how hard it is. Let me tell you the names that the kid in my home just called me. Let me tell you.
Right.
Let me tell you what that. And so that when they hit those bumps, it's not a surprise. But I think that's also can be true for our support families. Like we gotta tell them, hey, this is honestly really hard for them. This could be really hard on you. This is how it could be really hard on you. And we're telling you all this not to talk you out of this, but we're telling you all this because we know you'll stick with it longer if you know it ahead of time.
I love that idea of both those things that you shared, a banquet where a family can invite a support system, or, and maybe even fill in the extra seats with already, the trained volunteers. And I love that the idea of what you were saying, where people come and they bring their 3 or 4 or whatever people, and then they hear, from other people. And I think that part of it is when you're alone with a volunteer, even though maybe you've set things up before, there maybe is some uncomfortability, and I like the idea of having that maybe in a group kind of environment where you're like, they're hearing it from other people too, kind of these same things, like what we're, one of the things that's so relieving about support groups is, we realize, oh, we're not alone. We're not the only one, feeling or having these experiences. So I think that I like that idea, I don't know. What do you guys think? Would you? I don't know. I just think that would make me feel more normal and part of a bigger ministry and less of a project, I guess, is what I'm trying to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and I say invite teachers. Yeah, that would be awesome if
Oh man, yeah.
if a teacher was willing to come to something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, because it gives you common, these are things like one of the things we really lack, I think, is common language. And so you go through life and it's like it's like literally showing up in a country where you don't speak the language. Let's go to Bulgaria and let's try to manage. And when you're in foster care, you're living in a language, and then you get on a call like this and people speak the language. But when you go to talk to the teacher, it's not, there's a disconnect. And so by creating these environments where you learn together, it's you're introducing yourselves to a common language that the next parent teacher conference, it's a lot different, you know, when a teacher finally understands trauma and what that can mean for behaviors and what, you know, we've had those conversations with teachers. You know, we had a kid who would freeze up when she would get in trouble, and she just wouldn't say a word, you know, and there's the whole fight, flight, and freeze thing. And the teacher was taking it as just defiance of this kid will not say anything to me. They are, you know, they are so disobeying me, like they're, and we had to explain, you know, a little bit, you know, without oversharing, right? But explain a little bit of the background and say, she's terrified of you. Like she is, at that moment, she is terrified and she is not going to say a word, and it looks obstinate and it looks icky, but she's just really scared. And so that, you know, once we had that conversation, once we had that language to work with, we could always go back to that. But it was harder because we had to introduce the language to her. It would have been easier if somebody else had been able to help her understand that.
Yes, that just gets my mind going. So tell me about, I was just writing down, I take notes on every conversation. I put a little star and I put a teacher night with a free dinner. Like how great would that be at back to school time, you know, to just have everybody invite their teachers, and we could have a free dinner to try to incentivize the teachers with their time. I have no idea, but how great would that be to just speak to our families and help us, you know, be able to break that, that bridge, you know? But what I wanted to ask you about was, so you wrote a book called More Than Enough. So I just wanted to ask you, in the bio, you know, I said that you eagerly anticipate the day when God, through his church, provides more than enough for kids and families in the foster care system. And I'm going to say in the adoption world too. I'm going to throw that in there. So tell me about this book and what it is.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, you all know the two most common words that you hear inside the foster care system are the words not enough, right? Not enough resources, not enough support, not enough families. The system is always running on a deficit. And so the idea is, you know, we've kind of resigned ourselves to that, and to this idea that, well, we'll never have enough. We're going to try our best and do a little bit better this quarter than we did last quarter, this year than we did last year, and we'll just try to make it better. But I think we really lose sight of who God is, who God has shown himself to be throughout history, and really ultimately what I think, you know, is very possible is that we really need to reclaim this idea that I think God wants to provide more than enough for kids and families in our community. When we say more than enough, we mean more than enough foster homes for every child to have an ideal placement, more than enough adoptive homes for every child who is waiting, more than enough help for biological families who are trying to stay together and get back together, and more than enough support for all of these families. And so you know, when we talk about the God we serve, and you know, when the Israelites were wandering in the desert and they needed food to eat, and he provided the manna, he didn't provide not enough, he didn't provide just enough, he provided more than enough. When Jesus was on the side of the hill and was catering lunch for 5,000, he didn't provide not enough, he didn't provide just enough, he provided more than enough. And when the fishermen were out all night and they were fishing and they couldn't catch any fish, and Jesus came along and said, cast your nets on the other side, he didn't provide not enough, he didn't provide just enough, he provided more than enough. And I believe that he too can provide more than enough for our kids in care. And for some reason we gave up on that. And I don't know why, because not even the numbers, when you look at the numbers at a county level, now you all live in an area, when you start talking about LA County, that's, you know, that's the biggest foster care system in the country. But still, when you look at the numbers and you look at the number of churches, and you look at the number of followers of Christ, you go, more than enough is possible. And so this book, and this is what it looks like, but this book is about—
Oh, hold it up again. Keep it up there for a minute. That was quick.
Sorry. It is about working together to transform foster care where you live. So it's, what does it look like when churches start talking to each other? And this is not like a new idea, like, hey, let's pitch this thing and maybe it'll work. This has been working in other communities and communities around the country, where churches begin saying, hey, we've been absent from the table for too long. We have a role to play in transforming foster care. What if we work together with each other and with other organizations and agencies and with the government, in a constructive way to transform foster care in our community. And we're seeing it happen in places like Arkansas and California and Texas and Oklahoma. And so in Florida and all of these different places. And so this book is really a book about unity and about how do you actually, how do you find the right people? The premise is if you find the right people, work on the right things in the right way, you can see more than enough happen in the county where you live. And so that's the book.
I love it. I felt like you just gave me a jolt of encouragement. My husband has had this vision of 0 by 2020, which he started, I don't know, last year or whenever, of get a collaborative, of all our churches around Southern California and emptying out our Orange County foster care. And so I just love your bringing up those examples in the Bible. Like, yeah, oh my gosh, more than enough. Like, yeah, this could be done. I don't know, you're just so motivational. I feel like we need you to come out and speak on our collaborative to all the churches. It's so hopeful, like doable, like, and it is. It's like you said, it's God can provide that for us. And there's a way. It sounds like you've got a way laid out on how we could maybe improve in some areas. And Max is raising Max. Oh, he was telling me 5 minutes. I thought he was raising his hand. Like, let me get in this conversation. I'm totally in his arena here, which is not my arena. I'm like, just got all fired up from hearing you. But anyways, okay. So Jason, I'm going to transition. Max offered that book to anybody who is wanting to get it. It sounds like it's a book for volunteers, the church community, and it sounds like it's a really good book. I'm excited to read it. I'm hoping Max is going to give me a copy too. So I would love to transition. If there's anything else you want to say on this topic real quick before we transition, now's your time. All right. So Jason, tell me, what brings you joy?
Restoring broken things. So whether we're talking about families or kids, but also systems and communities, the church, when it refocuses its attention on hurting people. But at a really practical level, we had some old barnwood around our house from my family's farm up in South Dakota, and my 10-year-old and I made a flower box this weekend, and I'm always up for taking things that are old and broken and turning them into beautiful things. So.
All right, thank you. That sounds, fun. I love that answer, restoring broken things on all levels.
Right.
If you could say one thing to your younger self when you first started this adoption journey or foster care journey of working with kids from hard places, what would it be?
So it's such a good question. And this is what I think of. I haven't decided yet whether I would actually say it to myself or not, because I don't know how my younger self would respond to this and whether it'd be a good outcome. But
that's funny.
But I think that what I would say is, hey man, this is going to be way harder than you think this is going to be.
Oh,
and you are super naive, and that is okay as long as you are super committed. Wow. I have no problem with, I actually love it. No problem with naivete and people being naive. Sometimes people get criticized. Oh, this person's so naive. They're coming in to fight. They don't know what they're doing. They use the wrong words. I'm good with that. Like we all were, right? We were all naive, and naive is okay. And naive, God uses naive all the time to get us to where he wants us to go and to do things that if we were smarter, we would never say yes to. So naive is okay, but as long as you're committed to sticking it out, and that's But I don't even know, like I said, if I told myself that, I don't even know if I would know what I meant, right? Like, oh yeah, I'm committed, I'll stick it out. But not knowing how hard it can be, not knowing what sticking it out looks like, it's harder than, you can ever imagine. But that's where I'm
Totally. I get it, what you're saying now. Like when you prefaced it, yeah, your younger self probably wouldn't get what you're even saying. Mine wouldn't have.
Be like, okay, boomer.
Yeah. All right, last question for you. What foster adoption myth would you like to blow up right now?
Well, I heard Helen say it earlier, actually, that foster care is about, the myth is that foster care is about caring for kids. I believe that foster care is about caring for families. And, it's really easy for somebody to get fired up about caring for a kid who's been hurt. It is a lot harder for us to get fired up about caring for the people who hurt them. And, we came into the space because we were doing inner city ministry. And so our first exposure to foster care was not through just the kids. It was through their parents, and it was through trying to work with their parents through addictions and through all kinds of things. And so we fell in love with their parents as much as we fell in love with the kids. And so I believe that if we as Christians can't be the ones that are the most, and unfortunately we have a reputation, and I think it's changing, but we have a reputation within the government system, within child welfare, as being all about the babies and all about the kids, and not about, restoration of biological families, not about reunification. And that's sad to me, because I think if anybody ought to be about reunification, if anybody ought to be about redemption of a family, if anybody ought to be about restoring broken things, it ought to be those of us who follow Jesus, because he restored us.
I love that answer. Yes. Yes, I just love the all-encompassingness of it. I mean, in these conversations on Replenish, the bio families we don't talk about a lot because we're talking to adoptive and foster families, but I just love that you bring that into the equation, that yes, we're about restoring those families, as much as possible too. And foster care is about all families. We want to help. I love that, because it's so true. You can't really heal a kid if you're not going to help heal the family, whatever family we're speaking to,
Amen.
Well, Jason, we have to wrap it up because, like I said, we need to use this Zoom for another thing, unfortunately. But I just wanted to thank you for coming on the show and having a conversation to replenish us. We appreciate your time and value your contribution. And thank you all who called in this week to this week's Replenish Zoom. I pray that all of you who are struggling during this time feel replenished and receive some hope to sustain you. Don't forget to join our private Facebook group for parents, Safe, Precious, and Heard. And I just wanted to mention our last Replenish for this season is next week, next Tuesday. We're going to have Kay and Mylan Yorkovich. They're the authors of How We Love, and they're going to be talking to us about trauma and attachment and how to heal as a family. So Jason, I just want to thank you again so much. I feel every time I have one of these shows, I learn so much, and I just really appreciate what you brought to our conversation today.
Well, thank you guys, and thanks. It's just beautiful what you guys are doing together as a community, and how you're supporting each other. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. All right, everybody, we're going to sign off for tonight. God bless you. Thanks for coming on.